Hello and welcome to Placing People First, a Next Phase podcast celebrating innovations in life sciences. Today I'm very excited to be joined by Stephen Sullivan, who's director of Lindville Bio, a consultancy that covers the translational aspects of pluripotent stem cell research. Very warm welcome to you, Stephen.
It's great to be here, Steve. Thanks.
You're very welcome. So I think a lot of the people who are going to be watching this podcast, a lot of people who are connected with us one way or another, will be very interested to hear Stephen's insights into where the industry is right now, particular trends, particular roadmaps for where we might be heading collectively. And, you know, Stephen, I mean, one of the things I've always really enjoyed seeing when you're doing so much online and some of the different things you've been involved in, you're a very passionate supporter of innovations in the pluripotent stem cell world, but also ATMP more generally. So as a bit of an introduction, could you please just tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, your overall passions for this industry, and kind of what took you down this route?
I suppose, back in 1997, there was two huge scientific achievements. One was the pluripotent stem cells were rendered, human embryonic stem cells were rendered for the first time, and the other was Dolly the sheep was cloned. And when you put those two discoveries side by side, you're able to make a skin cell or a blood cell revert back to a primordial-like state, and then induce that into any cell of the human body. And if you know anything about, studying human disease or human development, it's always getting enough material that the experiments are limited by. So here was a way you could make the cells forget what they were, make them into what you wanted, and that was going to be a huge thing, not only in the lab, but ultimately was going to peter down into the clinic. So, regenerative medicine, or ATMP, which stands for Advanced Medical Therapeutic Product, or cell and gene therapy, all of these, acronyms and, specialized jargon, they're all talking basically about harnessing biology to understand more about development and disease. And like my particular area focuses on induced pluripotent stem cells, which are reprogrammed blood or skin cells usually. And the sector overall is growing strongly. As I say, it's because that you can see a lot of potential for areas such as cancer, for example. There's new forms of cancer treatment coming through, like CAR T, that they've very promising results in numbers of patients, and the next step now is to be able to manufacture that and roll it out for large numbers of patients in a safe and efficacious manner. And if it works for one type of cancer, the hope is that it'll work for other type of cancers too. So when you're talking about diseases like cancer or cardiovascular disease or stroke, obviously there's huge demand for better medicines in those areas, because we spend an awful lot of money, and obviously there's a huge societal toll that's taken by all of these diseases.
Of course,
so I think one of the reasons the area as a whole is growing in quite turbulent times is that the demand is so big, and the traditional treatments, if they're available, can potentially be improved upon by people working together. And that's one of the things I would stress is bringing new medicines to market requires many different professional silos, different smart people in different functions, and not only having proficiency in their own area, but having a general view of how we get medicines to market, and also being able to work effectively as a team. The whole day of prima donnas doing everything on their own, that might work in kind of like the context of a soap opera or a TV show, but in the real world you got to work effectively as a team. And I think if you want to build a team, you have to work effectively with your recruiter, and you have to, articulate what you want and make sure that you're not being overly specific or unrealistic, and giving an idea to the recruiter as well about the character of the person that you want to select, because areas of technical expertise can be taught, but integrity can't. So you're after somebody who has the strength to just tell the truth if something is going wrong, and this makes it far easier then for them to be managed effectively, and that's particularly important in areas where we're trying to develop new medicines for the clinic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can imagine that if somebody comes up with an amazing new concept, a great idea in principle in an academic environment, for example, they may not necessarily understand further down the line the logistics of scaling that up, and what it's going to be like moving into GMP, what it's going to be like working with international supply chains. So I guess that spirit of collaboration and being able to share ideas and people knowing where to go to get those kinds of resources so they don't make mistakes at the beginning, I guess that's going to be quite an integral part of what you do.
Yeah, so for example, if we're working together, I'd have to acknowledge the fact that I don't know that much about human resources, I don't know that much about recruiting, whereas you do. And if I start extrapolating from my area of expertise into yours, then I'll probably make a load of judgments that aren't based on reality, and our team won't work as effectively as it could do if I just basically listened to you and your level of expertise in this area. So it's about finding out. Well, it's about having the humility of knowing what you're not an expert in. And trying to build up teams that have those areas of expertise. So apart from recruitment, be thinking about areas like regulatory affairs, like how do we get regulatory approval to go on a clinical trial and beyond. Manufacturing expertise, how do we grow cells and in large amounts, and how do we get them to behave in a consistent and predictable manner. So, engineering, manufacturing expertise. And then you have other areas like, for example, clinical application. So, the format in which your medicine is introduced into the patient can have a huge effect on the overall impact of that medicine. Is it a medicine that can be easily injected by, say, for example, a general nurse? Or is it a graft that has to be specially surgically implanted by a consultant with very specialized training? Because if it's the former, then your medicine's probably going to be administered to a much larger number of patients, as opposed to the latter, where the specialized expertise required to administer the drug or the therapeutic is far less. So having these kind of discussions, early developers building up teams in regulatory, commercial, clinical application, manufacturing, this means that the decisions that are taken early on can really affect the ease with which you can move to the clinic and have an impact on people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a lot of parallels. I mean, you referenced it yourself a moment ago about the HR process, the recruitment process, and of course that's the world that we're in here at Next Phase. And we often have companies, large and small, who have very, very specific technical requirements. They have to get to a certain point, usually quite quickly. And so they will come to us and say, well, we need people who've got these specific skills. One of the challenges, of course, and it's this skill shortage that we hear about a lot, and it becoming more and more apparent as the industry continues to grow exponentially, is that there simply aren't enough people out there who've got this really, really dedicated experience in a lot of cases. So where can companies maybe make some compromises? And so that's some of the consulting that we will do with it.
There's kind of must-haves and would-likes, and it's very important that you differentiate between the two. So technical expertise, you can normally teach that in-house to some degree. So that mightn't be a must-have. Whereas, for example, honesty and integrity and, a track record displaying achievement, might be, So, I mean, ultimately, the character of the person is the most important thing. You want somebody who's honest, who can interact effectively with their teammates, and be part of a team. And ultimately, if they're a believer in that, that they're enthusiastic about bringing new medicines to market, then, that's a huge motivator, and you're probably going to get a lot more out of that person on your team than, say, somebody who's just in it for, just for the money, or just have something to do 9 to 5.
Yeah, completely agree with you. I completely agree. So we're really interested to hear your take on what your overall perception of the if we call it the ATMP sector in 2022, because I remember reading there was the Cell and Gene Skills Demand Survey of 2019, and they made these predictions for how the industry was going to grow. And they were saying, okay, so these are going to be the relative numbers, and by 2024 we're going to be this number. Now that number we had already reached by the end of 2021. So the industry has grown far more quickly than people maybe thought it was going to be the case. So what's your take on that? I mean, is that is that a universally positive thing?
Well, I think that the first thing to say is that the UK government and organisations like Innovate UK have a long-term vision for this area, and they want the UK to be world leaders in the production of new medicinal products, and so they've created a lot of infrastructure, like for example the cell and gene therapy catapult, which can help early stage biotechs transition into a manufacturing stance. So there's the long-term vision, and then these organizations like the cell and gene therapy alongside an integrated healthcare system, which is, again, the NHS is quite unusual compared to a lot of other countries around the world, in its integrated nature. And this means that the relationships and the networks that are there, which are hugely important to rate of progress, can be leveraged as long as we have the right people and the right teams together and in place. And I suppose that's really the challenge at the moment because of Brexit is, I suppose we can't source with the same ease talent from outside that we possibly would have gone after before. And it's like, okay, well, is there that talent in the UK, or can we train it up? So I think like one of the things that I wanted to engage with you on is, there's a number of different teaching platforms that help upskill people who maybe don't have the skills right now but want to transition into this role. So for example, I mean, there's cell and gene therapy catapult have an apprenticeship program. They also have various kind of learning platforms. And then, in Europe as a whole, you've got ETRIS, which is the European infrastructure for clinical translation. They've also got, learning platforms. And one I came across relatively recently, the International Society for Cell and Gene Therapy, also have a virtual training program, which if you join ISCT, it's free. So this will take you through kind of a lot of the basic elements of what are involved in, making new cell and gene therapies, GMP manufacturing, and, it starts you on the road to understanding the language and understanding what's involved, and, the basics of working in a clean room, for example, or, how to start qualifying and assessing product to make sure that it's safe for subsequent use. So that there are resources out there, and particularly during the the COVID lockdown, some of these infrastructures were fortified and a lot of content was produced. So even if you don't know everything right now, there's a lot of resources out there that can allow you transition into this area of space if that's what you want to get into.
Yes, excellent. Earlier this year I met with Kate Barkley from the BIA, and we had a really interesting conversation about, and she actually referenced some of the same things you just said there, about some of these resources that are available to companies. And it certainly challenged my perception of apprenticeships, because I'd always thought apprenticeships may be more for entry level, generally younger people coming in. But actually, apprenticeships and particularly programs around cell and gene therapies are available to all. It's really down to companies to have a really clear strategy for how they're going to hire people in, maybe from other industries, sort of broader pharma, maybe from the food sector, from medtech, wherever they might come from, and harness those the core skills that person has, and then help to develop them internally. I guess still that there is still a lot of focus on trainees. There's still a lot of focus on internships and graduate training programs and so on, as exactly there should be. I'm just wondering if there's a lot of focus on engaging people at that level, does that then put strain on other areas of a business? So perhaps around that mid-level, if they're bringing a lot of people in who don't necessarily have the ATMP expertise.
Well, I suppose you could say that there's plenty of room for promotion within those organizations once you get in. But I mean, if you look at the demand side across the whole kind of regenerative medicine kind of ATMP sector, like there's a lot of kind of junior people coming in, which is fair enough, but then there's kind of this big glut in the middle. So kind of like project managers, or like ClinOps people, or manufacturing technicians, and then when you get to the very top, the very senior people, that opens out again, and supply and demand are reconciled. So at the moment, in particular, to help the sector grow as fast as it can, we need to maybe get people to move laterally into the space. They, as you say, like they might have some experience in other tangential areas that use the same skill set. So for example, food production, you mentioned there, that's a good example. Or it could even be like clean room experience in terms of microprocessors, or things of that nature. Sure. So but there's a lot of transferable skills, and one of the key things, if you're smart, you'll sit down and figure out what your transferable skills are. So you might years ago, I remember I was working in a lab, and the dean of the lab was always asking people in interview, did they like cooking? Because he knew that if people were good in the kitchen, particularly with baking, where the amounts and measuring out the right amounts are is really important to the end result, that if he got someone that was good at baking in particular, that he's probably sourced somebody who will be very, very good in the lab, because they're detail orientated, they can follow a written protocol, etc. And I think that's also true when you think about manufacturing. Like, I mean, if you're a particular fastidious type of person that pays a lot of attention to detail, and can do a job as written down, that's a very key transferable skill. And as we referenced earlier, like integrity and telling the truth at all times really makes you a prize asset, because I suppose nothing's worse than ambiguity if you're a manager, and if people are honest, then ambiguity is kept to a minimum. So those kind of things you can't train into people. So it's very important to try and select and go after those kind of people, and that you may have a lot of the skills that the workforce is looking for right now without realizing it, and that maybe with some additional training, or with some just virtual education, you might cross that threshold into the area that you're employable within the sector, and then you get into a company or into a lab, and you grow with the sector as the sector grows.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking it's probably a very good reason why I didn't move into the lab for my own career. I'm fascinated in reading about scientific innovation, but I never went down the lab route myself. And it's probably because I'm also pretty terrible when it comes to baking. So maybe there is a very direct parallel between the two.
Well, you more than make up for it in your people skills, so, and, HR, you have to be good at reading people, and good at assessing them quickly, and reconciling what they are on the page with the person that's sitting opposite you, and that's a very unique skill set as well, right? So don't put yourself down.
Well, Taylor, it's a big compliment. Thank you very much. So I remember when we spoke before, you and it was a great phrase. You referenced hidden pockets of talent. I just wanted to understand a little bit more about what you meant by that.
Well,
in the context of what you just said.
I'll give you an example. Like, I mean, I was at a conference earlier this year where they were like talking about the skill shortage in this space, and it was a North American conference, and the speaker was saying, we need to get more baristas into our sector, and I was thinking about that because I go to a coffee shop quite regularly here, and the baristas, they're there to make a cup of coffee that's as consistent as possible, as good as possible for the customer, measuring the right amount of beans, and then being able to use the coffee making machine in a way that produces a product that is consistent and of high quality. And that's very similar to what we do in medicines manufacture, where we want people who can follow protocol, can follow direction, take good documentation, and do the same thing, in the same way, according to the documentation. And so there are skills in common there, and with some additional kind of training, you can possibly transition. And it's not flippant to say that you can transition from something like a bakery or a barista type role into into a technical role in a manufacturing suite. Obviously you need some training, but if the basics are there and that you've shown transferable skills and the necessary values, I think you're an attractive candidate, especially if you have the tenacity to chase this kind of role yourself. Like, I mean, I remember early on in my career there was a lab I really wanted to get into, and didn't get the grant, but kept on nagging. Stubbornness, tenacity, and stubbornness, and having enthusiasm for the role. It really makes you stand out relative to the other candidates. And if you're persistent in wanting to get into something, that's very attractive from an employer's point of view, because they know that you're motivated, and when you come and join the team, even if you do need extra technical expertise, you're motivated in the job, and that's a really desirable trait to have in an employee. That they've drank the Kool-Aid, as the Americans would say. That they believe in the mission.
Yeah, I completely agree. We actually started about a year or so ago using personality profiling as an integrated part of what we do, and I know there can be some natural skepticism from some camps about personality profiling, but it's amazing how accurate these can be, and even as just an indication of how someone might handle certain situations. We've actually seen a significant increase in our rate of placing people in new roles, but also the amount of people who stay beyond probation in their role. And it's really, really interesting to see that so much is about not necessarily having a right or wrong personality overall, but about having a suitable personality that is right for that company's culture.
Yeah, and also, like, different types of personalities, they exhibit different stress behaviors under stress. So like, you know, I think that's an area where if you can understand more about your own psychology, that actually it can be really effective in transmitting your value to either a recruiter or other a potential employer. So for, you know, Myers-Briggs, these kind of tests that kind of, you know, they don't definitively, you know, describe everything about your psyche and what kind of person you are, but they're a good rough approximation for,
They are.
you know, employing people generally. So, you know, like they have various characteristics, like are you an introvert, are you an extrovert, you know, are you a kind of a perception-based person or a feeling-based person, and you know, there's particular types of people that are quite suited to working in the lab, sometimes alone or part of teams. So like being able to have a rough idea about what you are in the broad spectrum of humanity is a good thing to have, you know, regardless of, you know, it's good for your own awareness. Like there's some jobs I'd be absolutely terrible in, and you know, it's good that I know where my area of expertise is, and you know, that I don't become a ballet dancer anytime soon, for example. I just don't have the legs for it. So, you know.
Well, I'd be really interested to understand as well, because of course you're very well connected within the industry. You've seen different organisations be very successful with their, you know, hiring good teams, developing people internally, and having success as an organisation as a result. But I guess also not just individual companies, but also different territories, different countries. I just wondered if there were particular lessons that can be learned from groups that have done it really well.
I mean, like if you take certain cultures do teamwork much more intuitively than others. So like the Japanese, you know, they're so good at manufacturing cars, for example, and you know you know, whereas if you go into the States are very good at innovation, and you know, they love taking risks in areas that are, you know, new, for example, and you know, so like, you know, they see themselves as frontier people. So, you know, it's no surprise in some ways that, you know, the Americans are, you know, leaders in areas such as biotechnological innovation, and you know, for example, the Japanese are world experts at, you know, producing medicines as well as cars. So culture does come into it. I think one country I think that's very interesting from a UK's perspective is Canada. So Canada, relatively speaking, had you know, some resources, but not much compared to its southern neighbour. But it has grown steadily over time, and has had some amazing stewardship in the Centre for Commercialization of Regenerative Medicine. And what they've done is they've built up these kind of cross-functional teams that interact with the early developers in the universities. So one thing that's a real discriminator for Canada is, you know, when somebody comes out of the lab with a new discovery and they patent it, they kind of feel that I can make a business out of this and it'll be amazing. But actually very few businesses are last if they're only based on one piece of intellectual property. And what Canada do very well, and the CCRM do, is they bring early developers together and they form alliances. So they basically create businesses that have more than one piece of IP, which basically means that they're creating stronger businesses that last. You know, that they remain around. I mean, one of the big problems is if you have a business based on one particular discovery and one piece of IP, that other people will be able to work around that one piece of technology and find alternative ways, and then ultimately what you thought was going to be a really successful business then gets outcompeted in their own space. And I think that's something that many countries around the world can think about hard, because I think the more we facilitate academics to contribute their IP to fortify the businesses that are resulting from those, I mean, everything gets better, because the companies stay around longer, the expertise grows, investment in the area grows, government become more confident that their investment into the labs will translate into economic benefit and societal benefit. So, and the way Canada did that, and the Centre for Commercialization of Regenerative Medicine did that, is that they had these kind of jack of all trades kind of people right at the center of leadership. So they would be scientists, but they'd have some business experience. They'd have led a biotech company, so they understand several different worlds at the same time. And I think that it's the time to try and get a holistic view about everything that matters, just to a small degree. That makes you quite powerful. So I suppose the way if you're going to stay in the middle of one particular area like a scientist, it's always good if you can get, say, for example, some project management qualifications on the side, or even some basic financial management, because when you come to running a lab, you're still going to have to watch the dollars and cents or the pounds and pennies. So those kind of common skills can be quite useful, even if you stay in a completely scientific role. So I suppose never stop learning is kind of a thing that they put out there all the time, but you can always improve your capacity, not only to understand a project and bring it in on time to budget, but you can also work on yourself and your communication skills, and that could be being able to manage more effectively up the ladder, as well as the team beneath you.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear the Canada example. And I was thinking back to the Advanced Therapies Congress a few weeks ago, where there was quite a bit. They had the whole section for startups, and there were I'm trying to think, the number of companies was around 50-60 companies, and all these individuals, all with these great ideas. And you like to think that they're all going to be incredibly successful. In reality, as you mentioned earlier, if they're putting all their eggs in one basket, they're not necessarily all going to succeed. So maybe that spirit of collaboration from an early stage, recognizing that you maybe can't do it all in-house, so you need to have that expertise from other people around you. And if that can be somehow encouraged in terms of the world that they're within. So of course, the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult as an organisation is hugely beneficial within the UK, but as much as possible that these companies can be supported in that initiative to share and collaborate.
Yeah, and I suppose even though when you're the scientist in the academic lab and you've sweated and you've bled alone in pain for years to get your paper out, that then is the produces a patent. That you can't slice up the cake before it's been baked in the oven. And that's what you see, people trying to cut their slice before the pie hasn't even gone into the oven, metaphorically speaking. Like, even though it's the end of your journey as maybe an early developer, many other things have to happen before you have a therapeutic on the market. And I suppose it's basically about understanding where your limits of expertise are and how many other expertises need to be leveraged in order to get a safe and efficacious therapeutic to the clinic. And having I think that to some degree universities can hopefully will provide more support to early developers, but they themselves are cash strapped, so sometimes the help needs to come from other sources, like for example the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult, or consultancies, consultants such as ourselves. So just trying to build a holistic vision for translation and where best to put your IP, rather to make a business that will go the long term. Because as I say, what happens, you think your IP is all that's needed, but then competitors work around it, or you have a cash flow problem because you're not bringing in any revenue, you know, and so that sort of thing. It's really important to, you know, identify what the skill set that's needed for the next stage and bring that person in. No one does it all by themselves.
Yes,
you might think that because they're good at promoting themselves, but you know they won't. No one brings a medicine all the way through by themselves. You know.
And thinking from a staffing perspective, and particularly for people who are watching this who are saying, right, okay, I need to hire people into my QC team, I need to hire people into my QA team, I need to hire people with supply chain expertise, for example. I remember when we spoke before, you mentioned that Ireland is an interesting market, but perhaps because of some of the things they're doing very well.
For historical reasons, there's an interesting relationship between Britain and Southern Ireland in that there's reciprocal kind of facilitation of employment rights and such. So basically, you're effectively, even if you're from Southern Ireland, from a lot of perspectives, if you're living in Britain, you're effectively a British citizen, and vice versa. And I think this is because of Northern Ireland and the I suppose the complexity and the people with different cultural identities associated with either country. But as a result of that there is Irish people can be easily employed in the UK, and vice versa. So I mean, one of the things that the Republic of Ireland, Southern Ireland, does well at the moment does a lot of pharmaceutical manufacturing. So there's a lot of QC and QA people there. That might be a lot easier to recruit to your mission and your company versus, say, trying to get somebody from another European country or elsewhere, for example. So it's worth considering. I'm living proof to an extent. I'm working in the UK. I'm Southern Irish citizen, but it's kind of a useful thing at the moment because you can move freely in the EU and through the UK, so it's good.
Yeah, it's a very good position to be in. And yes, because one of the big challenges for companies at the moment is the need to expand, the need to hire people. And there are certainly some companies we've seen do it very well, where they have a mixture, where they have some people who they bring in from other sectors. They have a good internship program. They fully embrace the resources that are available to them through, say, the Catapult and elsewhere. But also, particularly around that mid-level, if they can have a bit of an openness to hiring people in who have got a good career already. And of course, salary inflation at the moment is a whole other topic, and a very relevant one too. So companies need to be quite creative, realistic, and in terms of how they're setting up their internal training infrastructure. But it's really interesting to hear that maybe there are these hidden pockets of talent around that maybe they possibly haven't tapped into. Maybe it could lead to more of advertising.
Well, like for example, make sure that you interface effectively with your recruiter and give them very clear ideas of what you want and when you want it. Like for example, I had a recruiter phone me up 2 weeks ago, and we have this position, and I was okay. Who's this position with? Oh, we can't tell you. They're in stealth mode. And right. So what's the job about? Oh, I don't have that many details at the moment. And I just turned around and I said, well, you realize you're wasting my time by phoning me up and not having the details. She said, oh, sorry. The company hadn't passed me the details, and this wasn't obviously you. This was another recruiter.
Glad to hear it.
But it was just it showed quite clearly that there was a lack of understanding from the company side, and a lack of respect for the people that they were getting the recruiter to target. So I mean, I would also think about that side, because if you're not open and honest with the recruiter so that they can identify the people that you need, and if you're not realistic in terms of what is out there and what isn't out there. I mean, the recruiter is not a magician. that you need to be realistic, and you need to articulate clearly to the recruiter so that the recruiter can go and find exactly what you want. So, I mean, sometimes I think, recruiters are bad-mouthed unnecessarily. It's usually because they've been given a woolly briefing from their employer. And that usually comes down to maybe somebody who hasn't had HR training or hasn't written a job description before being dropped into that situation. And like there's definitely an expertise in writing a job description for a vacant role, and think about that, because if you write a good job description, the recruiter will easily be able to get you what you want, whereas if you don't put much thought into it, the recruiter is going to be chasing their own tail, and it's your fault. So I think
I would completely agree. Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, respect is we should be respecting all potential candidates and the recruiters. And I mean, if you show disrespect in the recruitment process, I don't know about you, but I certainly as a client would run a mile, because if there's a lack of respect in recruitment, like that's the honeymoon phase. That's when they're trying to get you. So, I mean, if the company, isn't showing enough respect to their recruiter and then on to you, that doesn't feed well back to the candidate. And, the other thing is like giving the candidate feedback even if they're not successful. I mean, we've all been there where we were looking for jobs and we've put a lot of effort into an interview or preparing a CV, and then nothing comes back. And, those kind of human touches make people much more likely to work with your company in the future.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially when it's a market where there aren't that many people with a very, very specific skill set. You don't want to be burning bridges, because who knows when you might end up collaborating with that person, even if it's not as a direct employee, but maybe as an external partner. So I completely agree with you.
Exactly, and it's a very small world, and the person you spat at last week is your boss this week. So watch out.
Yes, I completely agree. Absolutely. So, yeah, Stephen, I'm so grateful to you for your time today. It's really, really interesting hearing your insights, particularly given the amount of contact that you have with so many different organisations within this sector. I guess as a final thing from me, I'd be really interested to hear where you feel the industry is going. So if we think about maybe the ATMP sector as a whole, how exponentially it's grown over the last few years, what are your thoughts? What are your predictions about where it's going from here?
Well, I think the UK is only going to extend its leadership position in this space, not only in terms of the government's continued support of the growth of the area, but also the kind of vision. The people leading the sector are very smart people, and I think that the UK is only going to stand out more as a leader in the coming years. I think I think that this one skills issue is and getting people into the right roles is a challenge a lot of countries are experiencing, but we can all do our bit by interacting effectively with our recruiters and picking good recruiters such as yourselves, and being realistic in what you really need from the client, or what you really need from a potential employee or a candidate. What can you train up in people tend to get fixated too much sometimes on technical issues when somebody could easily be trained up in the job. So yeah, I think that would be the key thing, and to work with the recruiter, and with the recruiter, or not like hand off to the recruiter, because there's a lot of specialized knowledge recruiters have, and it's not only their networks but their ability to spot red flags or spot potential is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Stephen. I really appreciate your time, and very much look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity.
You're welcome.